Go live, we shall go live. We shall go live. Hello everyone, let's see what we got. And before anyone thinks that my adoring fluffy research assistant is loving on me because I am his papa and I'm very kind and wonderful to him, it's because there's actually sausage and cheese sandwiches next to me. And watch. You can't quite see, but the head is moving in perfect sympathy to the sandwiches. Hello everyone, how are we doing? So this is the altogether slightly different approach. This is looking at the ships which weren't built and asking what would happen if they had been built. So this is the what if portion of the day, really, in many respects, because I do know you all enjoy what ifs. Hello, Bichon. Dan Freeman, thank you, Bichon, for that. 20 minutes till open. Oh, good lord, yeah. This is the fun with running 3 lives in one day. Frank Spanner, Dr. C, if more naval nations and more nations of battlecrew, could you imagine anyone making station ship battleships to protect their interests on the far side of the world? Yes. Or possibly having battle cruisers for the role, or alternatively building very heavy cruisers. I actually almost would be tempted to say you would get to see more armored cruisers built, i.e. ships large enough that a battle cruiser has to worry about them, but not so expensive that they're a full battleship. No. Hello, Raleigh. Yes, you're gorgeous. No. Which one? My hotel company does own beds in Virginia. 9630 run. So now we'll have the Tosser, N3, Leon, L20E classes. Pretty much. There are a ton of British proposed yards. There are. But I've limited myself to ships which actually started production. That's how I'm avoiding Tillman questions. 9681. How many 5-inch Mark 12 naval guns, 40mm Bofors, and 20mm Oricons could we fit onto the Alsace class battleship? A lot. Depends. Do you want ammunition for it all? Because that's your main limit in terms of numbers. You know, in terms of numbers of guns, it's your ammunition storage space. Right then. It's afternoon. It is afternoon in Blighty, yes, because it's now 3 o'clock. I'll be missing part 3 of Dreadnought Day as I'll be watching Drac, but I'll be tuning in for Sunday's Brewship stream. Thank you. Distinguished historic fiction fans. Cornwall puts a new sharp book. Thank you. Hello, Raleigh. Good boy. There is a lot of good history going on today. Something here. The dog is going for a DV select. The dog is going for something. Oh, John Owens. Tillman's just complained the Navy kept asking for bigger ships and said, Tillman just complained the Navy kept asking for bigger ships and said, why don't you skip to the end and have the biggest ships that can be built? It's an interesting idea. Would a missile tracking ship make for a good command vessel? If you have enough signals, yes. And enough data and enough system available to do so. No, you're not getting my sandwiches. We have been over this many, many times in the past. You never get my sandwiches. I will give you bickies, quite happily, but you will not get my sandwiches. Because the moment I give you one of my sandwiches, then it becomes like it is with money. And the moment it's kind of like Danegeld. The moment I give you one, you will come back for more. So I can't give you more. And the thing is, you've heard that explanation enough times. You know what Danegeld means. There's a lot more interesting ones than HMS Incomparable, although she gets a lot of fun. And I'm going to start off with this one. I'm going to point out, I'll just say, remind everyone who watches this, I currently have a competition going with my aunt. Because I started a spreadshirt store, she found out about the Blackburn. And now if I get to 13,000 subscribers by December the 31st, she and my uncle will take a photo of her and them both wearing Blackburn face masks that I'll be able to put up in cruise ships. So please, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe if you like the videos. And please share if you like the videos, because the more people that subscribe, the more chance there is of my aunt and uncle being pictured wearing Blackburn face masks. Very spelling. If the Germans, French, Italians, Austrians, and Americans wanted to buy UK battleships, who would they sell to, and which ships would they have been willing to part with? Probably not the Germans. Probably the French, they would have been happy to do. Austrians, maybe to wind up the Italians. And the Americans, they might have sold to them just so they could say to anyone buying American, well, let's be honest, they buy British. Hello, Stephatons. Thank you, Stephen Richards. So, this is part 2. Hello, Bear Smith. Probably if the Germans hadn't announced the Navy laws, the British would have been quite happy to sell to the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans. But it's when the Germans start announcing they're building to counter the British would not sell to them. And that's the thing. If the Germans had kept their Navy laws plan secret, the quickest way to actually build up to have a force that could counter the British would be conceivably to be ordering from their own yards and British yards at the same time. We do get to talk about the triple turret renown idea, but the first one to come up is the Borodino class battlecruiser. And I think this is a really interesting ship. I think if it had existed, it would have caused tremendous trouble for the Ottomans in World War One. I think it would have caused tremendous trouble in World War Two for the Germans in the Black Sea, because look at all that deck space. This is a ship which could have been easily upgraded, and which the Soviets could have probably maintained quite happily, like the Ganguts, and which would have given them quite a capable speed. You know, they are quite easy also to upgrade because their power is drawn from 25 standard Yarrow boilers. If they upgrade to small tube boilers, goodness knows what speed they could have got. They're doing 26.5 knots when they're first designed. If you upgrade that horsepower enough, you could probably getting up to 30 knots. And with 14-inch guns, they become a real threat. Samurai Shikan 93. Hello, another competition? Anyway, good evening. Yes, it is another good evening. Another competition. It's 10 p.m. here, and I'm pleased to be able to join live and join the live in a long one. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. So, Borodino class battle cruisers. They are started construction, and they are really Italian designed class. They are sort of Italian. How do I put this? They're Italian orientated, originating battle cruisers. And that's what makes them also interesting, because the Italians don't build battle cruisers themselves, although they certainly have plans. They never actually build them, but these are built by the Russians using the Italian ideas, and they are shamelessly being built for the Pacific. That is where these are aimed for. These are aimed for the Russian Far Eastern Fleet, which would have been a really interesting thing let's say these had been built and they had been in service, and then the Soviet Union had them up to in the Pacific at the beginning of World War II. Ooh, that could have been some fun stuff for the Japanese to deal with, because they'd have had to split their fleet in three. They'd have had to go after the British at Singapore, they'd have had to go after Pearl Harbor, and they'd have had to go find the Soviets. Alternatively, the Russo-Soviet War might have seen the full deployment of the Japanese naval capabilities, which might well have made the British and Americans go, hang on, that's what Japan's capable of. Russo-Japanese War of 1939, mainly a ground war campaign, because they don't have these. If they'd had them, and also it quite possibly means that the Soviet Union is invited to the naval treaty negotiations. The Ganguts can be ignored to an extent. The Borodino class couldn't have been. Grossazi, hull form reminiscences of the hours would have been bound. Yes, it is. It's, as I said, if you put them next to the Borodino, to the Gangut class, we'll try and get a picture of that class. Try and get a picture up, a design of someone. I've got a design which I can get up. Let's see, can I find a design? Yes, I've got the design. They really do illustrate beautifully well Sorry, the image system I had to show wasn't wasn't gonna work. So let's go to desktop and find that one again and set it up. There we go. You know, you can really see when you look at the Borodino class, the difference in shapes between that and a battleship. It's far longer, far sleeker. It's designed for higher speed. Battleship is basically, boom, straight sides. Admittedly, this is a very simplistic battleship design that the Russians are building. It's the first generation. It's an evolution of the Dante Alighieri, which they make for the Ganguts. But then you've got the Borodino class, and that's a very different hull form. And the Ganguts could, well, theoretically manage 24 knots. Janak, Borodino's were built in Petersburg, so Baltic theatre, and that would have given the High Seas Fleet Command a headache to High Seas Fleet, because they would need to split their fast units between the Baltic and North Sea. Yes, that would certainly have been an issue. But they were being built in Petersburg for the Far East. The Russians really didn't have many yards in the Far East to build with. They could take out the Soviets first. The Allies would not have joined in, most likely. As I said, there's the Russo-Japanese War. The thing is, the Japanese would have had to reveal some of their capabilities attacking the Russians to hunt down the Borodino class. Shalmei Shiaka, 93. When it comes to increasing horsepower, besides upgrading the small tube boilers, would the existing turbines and screws remain the same or need upgrading as well? Depends on the turbines you fitted. if you've got heavy-duty, well-built turbines, they might well be able to take the increase in pressure. However, if you've gone for bare minimum designs, they probably won't. Line 6831. What 12.7-inch machine guns would likely replace the Hood's 5 quad Vickers, 50 cal AMGs? Probably the British would have gone for 20mm Oricons or 40mm pom-poms. They could have had some single couples. Guy001. It could have. I could see the Soviets being invited to the Second London Conference, but U.S. Republican administrations, 20s and early 30s, wouldn't do it. No, but there again, you have to remember the 1920 treaty is organised by Wilson, so maybe. But there again, at that point, there isn't really much of a Soviet Union to invite. Gilshek, by selecting a design meant for the Mediterranean, suggests the Soviet operation plan was mainly operating in the Sea of Okhotsk and the Sea of Japan with limited expense into the Great Pacific. Not really. The thing is, they've got the Italian design, so the Italian designers have assisted them in designing it, but it's meant for their capability. So basically, just consider it like the Russians going, well, we could do this ourselves, but we don't have much capability and much experience. The Italians have very good design schools, and they have this design that they can adapt to our needs. We'll go with that. Gilshake, or was it to be a service raider lot to be lost in the openness of the Pacific? Pretty much the latter. So, how would you, Frank Spasato, how would you define the difference between a strategic and tactical in the context of battleship design? Strategic tends to govern things like range and gun, and the gun selection. Tactical tends to cover things like maneuverability and secondary armaments and those sort of scenarios. GeoGuy001. Would Borodinians have the range to operate in the Pacific? The range is listed up there. Hang on, the range isn't listed up there. I'm not sure. Their range was rumoured to be around 50% beyond that of the Ganguts. So the Ganguts could do 3,200 nautical miles at 10 knots. So you'll be talking about 4,800, 5,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. It's going to be interesting. But if they'd been oil powered, they could have been razzed. And let's put it this way. I think they are quite conservative designs for their starting off point. I think they can be adapted, and they have space to be adapted. That's the interesting thing about the Borodinos. The Mackinson class. 8 13.8-inch guns in 4 twin turrets. In other words, they are already admitting they can't win this one. Because by the time these are ordered, they are planned to succeed the Flinger class. And they are supposed to be laid down probably in about the 1914, 1915 region. So by the time these are laid down, the RN's already getting the renowns. How did the US and the UK counter the Tosser-class Dreadnought battleships and the Margee-class battleship cruisers? Well, it's the Lexingtons and it's the South Dakotas. But they both have both sides have plans, and they all have plans, and we'll get into this at the end. Frank Stradato, several people keep asking me, will I be going over what the Austrians almost built after the Viribus Unitas class? I'll be going over what I know about them when it comes up. Because there really isn't much that's available in good English language sources. I am trying to improve that. Sean Quigley. It was about the same time. I don't think he was a well man at the time of the Washington Naval Conference. Wilson. Knight 6831. How many 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oricons could have been added to Hood if she was in dock for a 1942 refit? A lot. You're probably looking at several octuple, maybe even 16 Bofor mounts. So you're probably talking about 6 to 8 of those, and as many 20mm Oricons as they can find. Both mounts are really very, very light in terms of a displacement of a ship the size of Hood. So it's more a question of how much ammunition and how much extra crew do you need to carry. On the subject of the Borodinos, James D. Japanese would definitely want something more than the Congos to hunt these down in the 1920s. Would they agree to the Washington Treaty knowing that these were out there? That becomes an interesting question. They might still do because the economics are still the same. But would they agree to it if the Russians don't take part of it? Because then they might say, well, hang on, the Russians and the Soviet Union might go, ooh, build a single new battlecruiser. Especially if they're modernizing them, in which case the Japanese will go, hang on, they're modernizing, we need to upgrade ours. Knight 683, the ship the Admiral class was designed to counter. To an extent, the Admiral class certainly provided the firepower to overwhelm the Mackinson class. But Renown has 6 15-inch guns, and Repulse, remember, have that as well. So, again, you have 8 13.8 inches. We have 6 15-inch guns. In a running battlecruiser engagement, you've got a top speed of 28 knots. Renowns have a top speed north of 30 knots. I honestly don't think these were that good a bet for the Germans. I think these were another example of the fact that by 1914, certainly by probably by 1913, certainly by 1914, the Germans didn't have didn't have the ability to keep up. They didn't have their ability to do that. James Lee, that's actually the problem. As you point out, the Renowns are a war emergency program. And the peacetime response of the British would probably be even more powerful. The peacetime response would probably be something along the lines of the Admiral class, but actually probably slightly bigger and better. Because in peacetime, you can do things you can't do in wartime. The Admiral class are limited by the fact they're built in wartime. So Shikaya 93. Line-angled forefoot from the keel to the forward perpendicular on the bows of some of the ships like the Borodino and German battlecruisers. It's one of the ideas about how to improve both stability and speed that they're trying out at the time, and it has some promise, but they have other methods nowadays. Geogang, Washington Treaty happened after Wilson left office. Yes, but the preparations for the Washington Treaty were taking place under Wilson. I should have clarified that one. Okay, so when we're talking about treaties and the impact of them, you have to remember that the treaty is signed here at this date. That's lovely. But there's going to be negotiations before it, for anyone to start negotiations for terms of reference before they start negotiating towards starting to reach an agreement and then reach this point. So it's like when we talk about the conferences of the treaties, a lot has already been worked out long before they reach the conference stage, but they now have to implement it and get in buy-in and work out the finite detail. So Wilson does have an impact on the Washington Treaty. Oswalski, why are Renown and Repulse less armored than the Tiger? They're not less so much as their armor's deployed differently. Anak, why did the Germans continue smaller gun diameter main guns still on the battlecruisers than their battleships? Because they only have... Germans are running into limits of their maritime infrastructure and limits of their production infrastructure and the funding and the basically all the systems they have in place to support and develop it. Francisco Caracola class, by the way, are some of the most beautiful looking ships you can ever imagine. And voila. They were never built. But I do wonder what the Mediterranean conflict would have been like if you'd had these 28-knot ships, already 28-knot built ships, if these had been built and they had replaced the... Basically, if the Italians had these and then added on the Littorios, that would have been a very, very scary fleet, because that would have been all battleships capable of 28 knots. Guy 8001, Mackinson and Erzert Yorkshire showing German battlecruiser going towards fast battleship concept, well protected compared to British. Well, that makes sense for the Germans. Let's be honest, the Germans should have been going towards the fast battleship project from the get-go. Because for the Germans, they have to fight their way past the British. They're kind of like the Austro-Hungarians who have to fight their way past the Italians, then fight their way past the French or the British to get anywhere in the world. So with the Germans, they have to fight their way past the British. There is no... Because of where the British are starting from and where the Germans are starting from, the Germans might get a small fleet past the British, but then when are they going to be resupplied? So they have to fight that battle first. fast battleships were always far more sensible for the German Navy as a concept than battle cruisers or battleships. Because they need the speed to be able to engage and withdraw if they want to. That's the thing. You know, when you look at some of the German designs, especially the hexagonal dreadnoughts they have at the beginning, that's 6 turrets. Lovely. Gives you all-round fire. Lovely. But A, you can't use 2 of those turrets in in engagement, and B, if you'd made those you'd have got the same broadside if you'd taken those 2 turrets off and made the other 2 turrets super firing, and you'd have then had all that weight and all that space to put into engines and fuel, so you could go faster and further. Salamis. The Salamis, of course, would have been, it was a battleship which was being built with, it's supposed to get 8 14-inch guns and was supposed to be serving in the Greek Navy. And here is the interesting thing. The Greeks are building her in Germany, but Germany doesn't have the infrastructure to build enough guns to equip her. So the Greeks have to buy guns from the Americans. Those American guns end up being fitted to British monitors. Because they can't get through to Salamis. Hello, Michael Patton. Danny Phillips, how does Mackeson's class change World War II if they're completed and given to Greece as compensation for not finishing their ships, i.e. Salamis? Well, if the Mackesons are built, it has a different gun diameter, so that's going to be annoying. But if they're built and given to the Greeks, and the Greeks have them, then if the Free Greek Navy has battle cruisers, then that changes the war in the Mediterranean to an extent, because suddenly there are these fast ships on the side of the Allies, and they are 2 extra capital ships at a time when extra capital ships are useful, because it allows you to multiply out forces. You have an extra couple, they're useful. They might not even be used in the Mediterranean, they might be transferred to the North Sea, to Britain. Why? Because, let's be honest, 13.8 versus 11-inch, they're probably going to win versus the Scharnhorst. Okay. Salama Shekhar, implications if each British Empire Dominion chose to sign a Washington Treaty separate to UK. What do they put in as? Are they put in as equivalents to France and Italy, or something below that? Because what it does mean is that suddenly America's got a very real problem in that it's going to be facing these fleets. Do they get to have their own capital ships? Do they get to have their own aircraft carriers? If the answer to that is yes, then you could well have World War II start off with, as I mentioned in the previous one, if Canada had actually built those 3 Queen Elizabeth class battleships and had them at the end of World War I, there is no way Canada, after putting all that money, is then going to go, oh yeah, we'll give them up. The British aren't going to accept the Royal Navy being smaller than the US Navy. So the US would end up having to accept that the British dominions had their own capital ships. So Australia would probably keep its battle cruiser. New Zealand might get HMS New Zealand, and Canada would get to keep its Queen Elizabeth class, and that becomes a problem. Because if you think about it, Canada, if they're still porting 3 Queen Elizabeth class, will probably want some cruisers, etc., and could end up entering World War II a larger navy than the German Navy, which has an impact on World War II. It also has an impact on the survivability of the Deutschland, because if there's 3 Queen Elizabeths on that side of the North Atlantic, and probably at least 1 or 2 of them will be wandering around that area in the beginning of World War II and might go, "Hello, Mr. Deutschland, how are you doing?" At which point Mr. Deutschland is going, "I have 11-inch guns, and I can go fast." And the Queen Elizabeths are going, "Yeah, you can't go fast enough." top speed of the Deutschlands is 26 knots. Top speed of the Queen Elizabeth's 25 knots. The Canada ones were supposed to be slightly adapted. They might have even been small tube boiler ships, so they could have been 28 knot ships. A Deutschland dealing with a 28 knot Queen Elizabeth coming down on its back? That's not good. That's just not going to be good end well for that ship. It's got nothing it can. It's got that can take it on. And again, if you have the battle cruisers replacing the Salamis, if you had the Salamis for the Greek Navy, so let's say World War One begins in 1914, 1915. Well, let's say World War One begins in 1915, 1916. Salamis could well have been completed and been with the Greeks. That could change World War One. Because it suddenly changes circumstances for the Ottoman Empire. They might have got their ships from Britain. They might have got Agincourt. In which case, there could end up being a fight between this, with 8 14-inch guns, German-built, fighting for the Allies, against a British-built Sultan Osmanayo, armed with all those 12-inch guns. That would have been an interesting battle. Knowing how passionate the Greeks and the Ottomans were and are, now Turkey's inherited the Ottoman beef of Greece. That could well have been a grudge match, which ended with both ships sunk. Man Peacock, what would the Nelson class look like if these had been built? If the Italian Francisco Caricola class had been built, then there is no way the Nelson class get accepted at being as slow as they are. Yeah, guy, if the armament values a uniform, the Francis Caricola is a well-protected fast ship. She was, very well. This was another one of the possible Greek designs. Bretagne version. So the Greeks were going to have 2 battleships. One built by the Germans, armed with American guns. One built by the French. One with 14-inch guns. One with 12-inch guns. Simon Shikar, what's the space between A and B turret magazine for on the Francisco Caricola? I can see the space between X and Y magazines dedicated for machinery, like the Congos. Actually, both of them are dedicated for space and magazines to keep the magazine temperatures even and away from the machinery spaces. If we go back to the Francisco Caricola quickly to explain this. So basically, this is the magazine area, and this is the magazine area, and they have all the machinery in this space. So it stops the machinery, the engines and the furnaces, cooking the explosive and cooking the ammunition. So that should make your aim and accuracy far better. Singlish, I thought Turkey was totally broke in those days. How were they going to pay for it? They were paying for them through national subscription. That's one of the reasons why there was a problem. So basically, everyone in the country who had the money put some money for it, forward for it. So it was it was actually being bought by the public. But the Deutschlands have torpedoes. They would probably be eating 15-inch shells long before they managed to fire the torpedoes. GeoGuy001. Deutschland class may have been fast or not happen if the treaty did not force retention of slower ships. That's true, but honestly, the treaty which forced retention of slower ships for the Deutschland class was the Versailles Treaty. And honestly, the problem for the Deutschland class is also German maritime infrastructure. Could they build faster ones? Potentially. What would they have looked like is an interesting question. But the thing is, if they could really have built faster ones, they probably would have built the Deutschland class faster. Decision. I feel I am professionally required to point out that Canada has deliberately chosen to be military weak as a way to cement the Canada-US relationship because we can't afford to be seen as a threat. Agreed, but there was a slightly different opinion in the early 1910s, and in the 1920s they might have enjoyed it. Post-World War II, who knows? Vision. Are for most countries fast battleships better fit than having battlecruisers? For example, your 28-knot Queen Elizabeth class to Canada. They are a better fit for most countries, unless you can afford to have a large enough fleet you can afford to specialise. And you also have to think about what's the battlecruiser speed in a fast battleship era. If your battleships are managing between 28 and 32 knots, then your battlecruisers will need to be up 38 to 40 knots to be able to sustain that, able to sustain the battlecruiser role. There's asking, let's say 25, 26 knots QEs for Canada due to engine wear, because refit was a few years before war. Deutschland would still lose. Yes. But also, in nicest way, if Canada has battleships and Queen Elizabeth class, those ships are going to be very well maintained and much loved. Whilst I agree with you, GC on one stack, I would say if I wouldn't want to be on a Canadian cruiser or destroyer into war years, their Queen Elizabeth class would be their capital ships, and they'd also be a good way of helping out the economy, sending them in for a refit in Canada, which would be another interesting option because if you have the ability to refit battleships in Canada, you might well have the British government think, well, we want to refit more of our battleships more quickly, because also that helps us with cementing our friendly relations with Canada. Bug Guy 8829. Would the US even sign the treaty if Canada and the other British Commonwealth got to keep their ships and not be included into the RN? That's a big question, but ultimately, if they could still get the building holiday and save that money, Congress would push for it. And they probably think, well, the odds are we won't go to war against Britain and the Commonwealth. Or if we do, we'll be able to build up with our massive industrial base. Ottomans may have been on the other side if they got the Sultan Osman, the Agincourt. Possibly Inca, possibly. Right, about it. Would that method of buying ships be useful today, i.e. buying a hull from one location and you got weapons from it? It's what we do today, if you think about it. Look at what Australia's doing. They're probably going to be buying hulls, they're probably going to be building their hulls possibly building their hulls in Australia, buying their reactors from one nation, and buying their weapons, their system, attack, command and control systems and weapons from another nation. Public subscription, something the US Navy could have used in the 1900s. Get a few cruisers built that way, and Congress starts worrying about re-election if they don't change their spending. That would be quite interesting. Here is another interesting idea. The Brazilian Riachuelo, which is based on... Well, basically, when they decide to give the Rio de Janeiro to the Ottoman Empire, or rather sold out to them, they then go to Armstrong Whitworth and select Design 78281, a evolution of the Queen Elizabeth and Revenge classes, which has 8 15-inch guns. Frank Steiner, Doug C., how would you specialize battleships for a fleet or battle line? If I was building them for World War One, probably battle line. For World War Two, but fleet. Your opinion of my countrymen is much higher than our own historical assessment of their qualities as decision makers. Mainly because I think they try their best with the hands they're dealt. If they'd had if World War One had waited off for another couple of years and they got their battleships, then you could be dealing with a very different. Because it's one thing signing away the rights to something you don't have. It's another thing giving away something maybe your public sport, especially as the Canadian government was planning on buying 3, and there were rumours of a public subscription to buy a 4th. In which case, they have a full squadron of battleships, homogeneous class, and one of those ships has been bought by public national subscription. Would you want to be the Canadian politician who turned around to everyone and going, but we needed to make the Americans happy, so we gave up we're sending all our battleships to the breakers' yards. Oh, we've just lost our election. Oh. Yeah. Right, Simon, could the Deutschlands have even worked if they fought together? Not really. They might have had a chance at the River Plate. If you'd had Deutschland and Graf Spee at the Battle of River Plate, they could well have won that one. Simply because they'd have had 4 turrets for 3 cruisers. But that would have required coordination. And again, if the Royal Navy had worked out that there was such a force in the South Atlantic, you can guarantee something like Renown would have been sitting with Harwood's squadron. Possibly not Renown, possibly Repulse, but any of the larger, faster ships the Royal Navy has would have been down in the South Atlantic. As it was, they were spread about because they were trying to deal with the Deutschland up north and the Graf Spee down south. Knight 6831. How lethal could the Japanese 40mm Type 5 AA guns have been? Anything would have been better than the 25mm Type 96. So I'm sure they would have been far better for Yamato. Dr. Z, sorry, I meant ships being funded by the public. Oh, yes. That would be a very interesting scenario. I'm not sure what the British government will make of it, but I have considered launching a public subscription to build another Type 26, because there should be 9 and another Type 31. Get 9 and 6. So it's multiples of 3. The government might, knowing the current government, they might actually decide. They might actually think this is a great idea. I'm fairly sure a large portion of the opposition would not like it. But it could be a very interesting thing. It might make the army think, perhaps we can get more tanks if we build. Hello. Sorry, something just dropped in the dog's water bowl. Sorry, did that scare you? We're on to the Agincourt. John Darius, why do you think Japan was throwing such a fit about Mutsu? Mutsu. It was paid for by public donations. Pretty much. It's a very big issue if you get something by public donations and then you sacrifice it. Dan Freeman, a refunding for ships for the British Empire dominions. Could the Indian princely states have been encouraged to pay for some ships like HMS Malaya or New Zealand? They might have been. Honestly, the Indian states might well have happily paid for one, especially if they'd been offered it as part of the scenario of building an Indian navy. I can imagine. Let's put it this way. I know one thing. If the Indian Navy had started during World War I with a battleship, and sort of as it felt to come of age then, that battleship would have been preserved and would still be around to this day. It would. Because the Indians would have loved that thing. Sorry, just opening a window. Believe it or not, with a poodle and a human and computers in here, getting a bit on the warm side. Even though it's raining outside. Chris Marr, didn't the Americans fear the Australians getting access to battleships? They were less worried about the Australians getting access to battleships than the Canadians, probably. They didn't like and again, that's the thing. They managed to get rid of HMS Australia, but she was one ship, and that's the thing. She was one ship on her own. If New Zealand had belonged to New Zealand, if Australia had belonged to Australia, and the Canadians had been keeping their battleships, then it becomes slightly more problematic for the Americans to insist that Australia goes. Would the Canadian QEs mostly stay in the Atlantic? Would they be pressured to send them to the South Pacific to help out Australia and Singapore leading up to the war in the Pacific? They'd probably stay in the Atlantic in 1939, 1940. And honestly, their presence in the Atlantic could well allow the RN to send more ships to the Far East. They might find themselves in use in the Mediterranean. You might well find Force H has a Canadian Queen Elizabeth class with it as well. Who knows? Start a GoFundMe page for the RN ships. Trouble is, what happens if you actually get the money? Well, it's getting the government to accept it. Something like Salman Shikaya, 93. Your thoughts on the slogan "We want 8 and we won't wait" in the early 1900s, Britain, or is it just a rumor on British public wanting more ships? Oh no, it was a real slogan and real campaign. But in those days, the Navy League was a powerful pressure group. A powerful pressure group. If you, oh, for examples of equivalently powerful pressure groups these days, in Britain, probably the Royal Society, the RSPCA has equivalent power in the public. You would probably in America, you're probably talking the big civil rights campaign organizations. You know, think of the most powerful pressure and lobby group you can imagine, and that's pretty much what the British were dealing with the Navy League. Hmm. Well, that's what that's the French part. I'd like to see. The army has publicly funded tanks. Could they get named after those? Well, actually, during World War II, there was the whole scrap metal for Spitfires campaign, which mostly produces scrap metal for bullets. We'll leave that to one side. The thing is, if the Royal Navy starts getting ships by public subscription, then the army probably gets into it and goes, hello, we'll get tanks this way. We'll get some armor this way. And, you know, they'll probably be very happy to have it and give them. But maybe, particularly big donors, will get a tank named after them. We'll get to pick the name of a tank. That'd be more fun. Mm-hmm. Darius asking, an Indian battleship would be whatever was increased. And here you go. Here is my idea of what Agincourt could have looked like. I have very much kept it very closely to the Queen Elizabeth design. I have to admit there are some limits, but their lovely Ultimate Admiral has been the base of them. The limits are that mainly they have what I would call World War. Went to get the 18-inch guns, which do look very World War II in design. I have to admit, you have to use a World War II era superstructure, which is why she looks like she does. So she does look like she's been through some sort of interwar upgrade, which does have an interesting impact on the weight, but I'll explain that in a bit. Dan Hoops. Furious, a strange mini battlecruiser. Best that she could convert to do was carrier. Yes. Ian Writer, if Canada to keep their battleships and Australia also keep their battlecruiser, do you think they would have carriers in their fleet before World War II? Say an Ark Royal each? Probably not an Ark Royal each. Probably something based off the Unicorn line, but they might well have them. Yes, or they might have got Courageous and Glorious, and then Britain could well have used that to build more Ark Royals and more illustrious classes. It's how it plays out. Graham Hanlon. Mind you, did the RN or indeed the UK government want the Indians getting hold of a battleship? We had spots of bother out there before. Yes, but a single battleship wouldn't have been much of a problem. But it would have been quite useful in the Far East because it would have been based there permanently. Knight 6831. If you were in charge of refitting Yamato's AA guns, what would you change? Every 100mm and every 40mm I could grab hold of. Did I hear you right? Secondaries are no. Secondaries are part of the tactical nature of the battleships. Basically, strategic is your primary gun. You know, the strategic considerations decide your primary guns. Tactical considerations decide your secondaries. Mitchell Oates, cunning with 3 more QEs at Matapan. That idea sounds delicious. Probably, well, at Matapan, he's fighting. It's the British Mediterranean fleet versus the not Task Force H. But if you have you might well find he has an extra ship. He might have Renown or something else at the Battle of Matapan, which might help him if he has a faster ship. so he can actually pulse his fast ships forward and split his fleet into 2 equal divisions, then that could well change the battle line and the Battle of Navan. Stop licking the hammer. Guy, paying for a ship by subscription is one thing. Maintaining and manning and crewing it is something else. True, but would you want to be the government that says we don't want to maintain and crew this ship that the public is so generously giving money for to buy? Do you really want to be that government in a democracy? Vision. HMS Australia was not a great battlecruiser by 1920s. No, but she'd have probably been upgraded in the 90s. She'd have probably been refit heavily in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So she could well have been not a great ship, but a useful ship. That's the difference. I'm not saying she'd be a great war winner. She'd go on and single-handedly fight the entire Japanese fleet or anything. But let's be honest, if Australia has a battle cruiser, then does she become part of Force Z? Do they have an aircraft carrier that's also tacked into Force Z? Do they become part of ABDA Command? That's a very powerful unit to have in ABDA Command, especially if she's managed to be upgraded with some fire control radar or something at some point, which she probably would have by 1941, as she'd be a major capital unit, and she has the space and more quickly to easily do it. It wasn't a case of British sailors or soldiers doing the thing. It was actually people going out and publicly subscribing. It was done by the Navy leagues and various other things in their countries. They would organize it. So it was civilians or veterans often campaigning and doing the fundraising. The ship design looks astonishing proper. Thank you. Judge Shay, what is the armor layout of the hull and turrets? That's actually coming up on the next slide in far more detail than this one. This is just the image of it, rather nicely sitting in harbour. It's got 6 18-inch guns in 3 turrets, 2 twins forward, 1 twin aft. And here you go. There are some provisions I would like to add. As I had to build it in 1940s mode, and it was going to be tested, therefore, against equivalent ships, I had to fit it with radar, I had to fit it with all sorts of things, which actually make it slightly heavier than it probably would have been. But here are stats, roughly speaking, from my design. Queen Elizabeth class standard was 33,790 tons in deep load. This is 38,796 tons in deep load. So that is an extra 5,000 tons. 230 meters long, roughly, 32 meters in beam, and 10 meters in draft. So again, not too massive, not big. Roughly the same size beam and length ratio to actually the Nelson class. 28 small tube boilers, 2 steam turbine sets, 4 shafts, and 84,000 shaft horsepower is the conservative estimate of what she would have. Speed, therefore, is lower estimate is at 28 knots, but I actually, in some of the simulations, it seems to be able to go to 30,000 knots. Again, the range for the way that Ultimate Admiral seemed to work out, it's always working out your range at your maximum speed. So I worked it out at 28 knots, and I was able to put enough fuel in this design for 16,800 kilometers. So they work it out in kilometers, but basically I was putting in almost twice as the distance it can go is almost twice as far as the Queen Elizabeth class. So it probably wouldn't have been anywhere near that. So that's probably me over-edging it, but I didn't want to make it any smaller because of the size of the maps on Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, and in case I had to hunt down the enemy. The weapons. 3 twin 18-inch guns, 5 triple 4-inch guns, well, actually they're turrets rather than the systems which are put on the Renown and Repulse, but they're similar enough that I thought it would fit quite well. 4 single 2-inch AA guns, or 4 3-inch AA, single 3-inch AA guns, really doesn't matter. And then we've got the waterline belt. For some reason, those bits have cut off, but I can actually read those out. As well. Now she has. Oh, that's what's happened. It's extended out for some reason. Don't ask me why. She has 15-inch waterline belt, same as the Queen Elizabeth has a 13-inch one. Decks are 3 to 5 inches thick versus 1 to 3 inch thick on the Queen Elizabeth class. Barbettes are 7 to 10 inches thick again. Didn't see the point in increasing those, actually. Gun turrets are between 10 and 15 inches thick versus the Queen Elizabeth class 11 to 13. So they're slightly thinner on the back, but slightly thinner on the back and top, but much thicker on the front. And conning tower is 15 inches thick. 28 knots. Is roughly 32 miles per hour. So it's not excessive design. I was ultimately very, very conservative putting it together because I didn't want to put anything in there which people would then go, oh, it was never have this and never have that. And I was sort of going, well, let's keep this as conservative as possible. The main reason the hull has grown by roughly 34 meters is actually it could be as low as a growth as only 24 meters. So it could have got up to 220. But I thought, well, maybe they'd have added the extra 10 meters on. And so I put it for roughly around 230 when I was putting design together because it seemed to fit better and seemed to look nicer that way. Dan Freeman, I still wonder about Archico having triple turrets with 15-inch guns and going for speed in place of battlecruiser, but having Revenge built slow but with big guns. Potentially, but I don't think they'd have gone for the triple turrets. The triple turrets don't appear. If you'd had the triple turret design going around, you'd have used it on something. And my grade 10 history teacher told us that Britain asked Canada to get ships before World War I, and because this didn't happen, that Canada didn't even have so much as a rowboat when World War I started. To an extent, but it's more they were taking their time. Geoguy, HMS Australia could have tied up a lot of Japanese cruisers. Just hope the Congo doesn't show up. Yeah. But Guy would the US still send fast battleships to the UK to help counter Tirpitz if Canada had QEs, even if the QEs are slow? Probably not. They didn't send that many to help fast battleships to the UK to help Tirpitz. I think they sent about I think it was Washington. I think it was one. I think was Washington. Not sure. Probably got the wrong one. 1198 Bear Hunting Armor. Did Agincourt do well in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts? She did do well. There is a picture there, and I managed to design fairly equivalently some German ships, which I thought she would have come to equivalent some time, and she could account for them quite happily. It is a nice ship, just appears to be suffering from Deutschland syndrome. I agree the turrets are a bit fat, but as said, they're World War II era turrets. And it's a World War One. I'm trying to keep it as close to the World War One design as possible. If I was designing it honestly with those turrets, I should be putting in a different hull. Not 30,000. 30, they've got 84,200 shaft horsepower and can do 28 knots. 28 knots. Imperial German Navy had a Navy League that was an interest group that promoted a naval expansion empire. I think Turpit was their front man. Pretty much. How to get Canadians to pay for a squadron of frigates? Ooh. Starship Cannon at 693. 6 times 18-inch guns? What about the 18-inch armed admirals? This was considered when designing the Admiral class. It was, and that would have been a very interesting thing. If they'd gone for 18-inch armed admirals, then... Well, that's another reason why I think there was the 18-inch Adjutant Corps. I don't think it's a new idea to go for an 18-inch gun. 18-inch gun. I think they are there, and they have been around and accepted as part of the design process before. Honestly, if you have 18-inch armed Agincourt, then it's more than likely the admirals are built as 18-inch ships. You might end up with 1 or 2 of them built. In which case, you could end up with an interesting Washington Naval Treaty. Don't show you. What components did you use? Everything barring... well, I added in radar, as I said, because I had to, and it's also got the full electronic warfare suite because you had to, because it's going to be fighting in the 1940s. But barring that, it's pretty much World War I era. The small tube boilers are the same type as were used on the Renowns when I was working it out, and I've set things up very conservatively. Honestly, the Renown's water tube boilers, they have 42, and they can do 112,000 shaft horsepower. This has gone for 28. Now, you need 42 water tube boilers because the Renowns are going for a top speed of 32 knots, and it takes a lot to get something up to 32 knots. But here's the interesting thing. Deep load, a Renown is 37,400 tons. So this is only 1,400 tons more than a Renown at deep load, but it's 28 knot capable. But it's my idea. There are no plans that really sort of exist of this. It's just me based on the information available and looking at it and thinking, well, they're talking about 15-inch specials. Last time when they talked about a 13.5-inch special, it turned into a 15-inch. So let's say that. And what can I fit on a Queen Elizabeth hull? The thing is, they could have been building something even bigger. It could have been much bigger than the Queen Elizabeth. It could have been more than 230 meters. It could have been 8 18-inch guns for all we know. It could have been a Queen Elizabeth design ripped large for 8 18s. But I'm being conservative saying 6 18s because that's what I think is sensible. The British were working on 20-inch gun sketch designs. Thank you, Brandon Larson. It's like I've got another supporter. Thank you. Paul Johnson, would the guns be 45 caliber or the original 40? They're 45 caliber. But again, the 18-inch 40 is something that's cut down for the Furious because there's only so much you can take. So I'm reckoning there is a good source which describes the Furious guns as being cut down 18s. So I reckon they were 1845s originally, and I reckon they were originally for Agincourt. That's basically, I'm putting together a lot of information, and I'm putting it in a form which I think makes sense. But I can't be 100% sure. The question is, what happens if World War I doesn't break out till 1916? I think you have an 18-inch Agincourt in the battle line. And I think that scares the bejesus out of pretty much everyone. Because if they're not scared by that, they should be. And it's the natural place for the British to go, because the Americans are talking about 16-inch, the Japanese are talking about 16-inch. The British are not going to jump to 16.5-inch because it's not enough of an advantage over a 16-inch gun. So the only option for them to do is jump is to 18-inch. Thanks, on Dr. C. USS Washington, South Dakota, and Alabama went to home fleet. I think they came in turn. I don't think they're all at once, but yeah. You probably don't need as. Probably still one or two of them turn up, but probably not all of them, because again, the Americans, to an extent, are supporting the British because they know how much the British fleet is spread up, because the British is in the Indian Ocean, Mediterranean, and the Atlantic, and they're coming in for that. If you got 3 more Queen Elizabeths as far to factor, 3 or 4 more Queen Elizabeths, then that becomes a sort of It also depends on how many ships the British have lost. But that's the other interesting scenario. If you have more to begin with, you might not lose as many. Because when your forces turn up, they might turn up that much more numerous. For example, again, if you've got that many more Queen Elizabeths in service, so you've got, let's say, 5 British ones and 3-4 Canadian ones, so you've got 8 to 9 vessels. That's 2 full squadrons. Yes, you probably have some sitting in Mediterranean still, but you might well be operating a combined squadron forward on the UK in the UK, which might well mean that you have a squadron of those go out to fight the Bismarck. And let's be honest, Bismarck facing off against 2 refitted Queen Elizabeths and maybe Prince of Wales and Hood at Denmark Strait is also not good for the Bismarck. Paul Ketchen, how do you rate this Agincourt against something like the Key class? Let's have a look. That's the 4 fast battleships the Japanese were planning on building, isn't it? They were supposed to be armed with 16-inch guns. I would say they have an edge in speed. They're almost 2 knots faster, but the Agincourt could have been upgraded. So if we go back to this one, the Agincourt could have been upgraded, but also the thing is, would the Japanese be building the Key class with 16-inch guns if the Agincourt exists with 18-inch guns? Probably not. It could change the entire nature of the interwar years, because it could well, especially if you look. Let's put it this way: the logical thing is if you have Agincourt with 18-inch guns, then Hood comes out with 18-inch guns, which means Britain has 2, possibly 3 battleships with 18-inch guns. Will the Japanese and the Americans accept having less powerful ships than the British? And probably not, which means probably the upper limit is set at 18-inch guns, in which case you could have a very interesting version of the Treaty Holiday come about. You might not get Nelsons as well. Yeah. At one point, there were 2 South Dakotas in British, seen probably photo of 2 behind a QE battleship, cruising through heavier seas in Atlantic. Cool. Knight 6831. Why were the 18-inch Admiral class rejected? Principally, they're rejected because it's wartime, and they have the 15-inch in service. They're building the 15-inch. They have that production line going. To get the 18-inch, you need to mobilize a full other production line. Now, I think my example is they produce 2 to 3 barrels, which is like a first run, I think, for this. Which is why I think, again, 6. I think they were planning on churning out 9 or so barrels. And if they had, again, if Agincourt has been built and is in service, then it's far easier to use an existing production line. But if you don't, and then you want to build ships as quickly as possible because you don't know when the war, you don't know how long the war's going to go on, and if you need them, then you build 15-inch because that's what you have. Sonic Nero, small tube boiler is 4 spoilers and ultimate admiral. Yeah, pretty much. Brian Larson, talk about HMS Sergeant Corps. 07 from Seattle, Washington. Oh, hello. Did the UK naval construction speed up or slow down as World War I approached after the game was cut out in 1913? It sped up. They were trying to churn out as much as they could. Dan Freeman, after the experimental excitement of Phil the Agincourt class, crashing on Earth with the French design. Yeah. It's a French design. Bud Guy is a British 18-inch shell seemed kind of light for the 18-inch gun when the Japanese had 3,400 pounds, Americans had a prototype 3,850 pounds shell for 48 cal and 47 cal test guns. Yeah, but again, it's a first generation, expected to be modified. And also, sometimes the reason the British go for slightly lighter shells is because you can move them through the system quite faster, and you can therefore theoretically maintain a slightly higher rate of fire. Which again fits with the idea of it being a 6-gun design. Because if you've got 6 guns and you want to maintain an equivalent rate of fire against 8-gun ships, you probably want a slightly lighter shell so you can try and keep it as fast as possible. But let's be honest, let's be honest. If the Agincourt with those 18-inch shells appears in World War One, there ain't much that can take it on. There ain't pretty much anything that can take it on when it comes into service. Even with lighter shells, those light shells hitting the German fleet would have caused horrendous amounts of damage. The whole idea that Jackie Fisher puts in the Furious is that, well, who wants to get close to or even risk one of those 18-inch shells coming into you? If you've got 6 and they're 45 caliber guns, as I think they were, I'd have said 42, 45 caliber is probably where the British were on its 18-inch gun, because that's going to be quite a hefty gun barrel length. If you think about it, if you're 42, well, times that by 1.5, and that's 63 feet long, that barrel. 45 times by 1.5, well, that's 67.5 feet long. That's a long barrel. Especially for especially for what we're talking about 1910s tech. Welcome to the Discord, Brandon. Just recreated a new Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts to the best of my ability and really works out amazing. It is a lovely design. Yes, and imagine that turning around the oceans in the 1915, 1960, well, probably 1916, 1917. That's not something you want to come across. If you delay World War II by 2 years, World War I by 2 years, and that comes into service, whenever they have Jutland, that's involved, maybe as Jellicoe's flagship. That's Jellicoe very happy. Hello, you came near my fleet. Bye-bye. Oh. Amy C. Woodson. Oh, hello. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to the Discord. Simon Shekhar, if and very big if the 20-inch guns were approved by the Iran, what caliber length would it be? Would the length limited be available facilities at the gun factory, such as crane weight limits? Probably. Honestly, if 20-inch guns come into service, you're probably looking at a maximum 45 caliber. Because you think about that, that's going to be 45, probably looking at 45. I'm just working this out. Well, let's put it this way. If you did 60, you'd be talking about 120 feet. That's massively too long. So this is I honestly think if you have an 18-inch gun coming to service with the British with Agincourt and Hood and the Admiral class, you probably don't get the 20-inch gun, because there's a point at which they're going, how long are these guns going to have to be? That's the main problem, the 20-inch. No, the whole point with World of Warships incomparable, and the whole point with building, is because it has to be so long, because the guns have to be so freaking long to balance the weight of them moving around, the momentum they generate. All the four weight though is interesting. Yes, it is about 8% unbalanced, the Agincourt. So it does create interesting before it does create. It does have a wet bow, which again might be why they might lengthen the bow. I think. Something I have no idea. People showed it to Doctor C, and I worked out what it was. Frank Spot, if I want to keep 5 ships of any class out of sea in time, give or take, does that mean I need a total of 15 of those ships? Well, that's if you're running a purely 1 to 3 scenario. But you can probably maintain 5 at sea with some strain on 10 ships. You can certainly maintain 10 at sea with 5 at sea with 12 ships. With 15, you can guarantee 5 at sea. That's basically the difference. You can usually maintain it with 10. You can most of the time maintain it with 12. You can guarantee it with 15. Grandma, if there had been that many QEs, would Legions have even taken the Bismarck to sea as he did? Probably would have still been ordered to, so yeah. Would the Colorados have stayed at 21 knots if the Canadians had 25 knot battleships along the British? Probably the Congress might have agreed more money to add their engines, but I must remember the limits on the American battleships was often the caps of that they built. Thank God we've managed to get battles with no questions on Normandies. We're now onto the Leon class, which are quite cute. Vision, you should do an article for the unbuilt HMS Agincourt for USNI's naval history or proceedings. I'm tempted to. And last one, what are your favourite and least favourite dreadnoughts? They're all going to be covered tonight from 7 o'clock, so in about 2.5 hours' time, there's going to be a live for about 4 hours going through favourite dreadnoughts. It's running from about 7 till 11 in UK time. Justin, do you think a blue sky RM without Agincourt tax sticks with twin turrets, or will they move to triple turrets? They might move to triple if they like the free turret arrangement. Not decision. The Normandy is a improvement on previous French designs, as they have thinking about something functional. Yeah, we can say that. And Hastalia. What if the German High Seas Fleet had 7 Bayern class battleships? If considering they managed to build 2 out of the planned 4, if they'd started off by ordering 14 of the Bayerns, goodness knows how many blooming battleships the British would have ordered. But probably you would have seen a lot of our 18-inch gun ships come out because they would have just jumped and gone, right, and you're building 15s, we're going to outbuild you. And it probably would have been the R class would have been faster 18-inch battleships. Sarah Shikaya 93. But single 6 guns, would it pass the argument which is 6 is the minimum of number of guns for accurate gunnery? Yes, it would pass the minimum number, but people would still want 8 or 9 if they go for triple turrets, but yeah. Frank Sardo, how difficult was it to crew these ships? Did the RN have conscription too? The RN didn't really need. They did have conscription available, but honestly, they were getting enough volunteers. They were fine. As Institution has just pointed out, Germany has 7 Bayerns to Germany in 1921 that didn't fight World War I. Their infrastructure isn't up to it at the point. Yeah. But guys, are there any surviving British 18-inch guns still around, or anything in the UK like that? What the US has at the ground testing grounds? I haven't found any 18-inch guns around the UK, but I'm always hunting them. I'm always looking at these sort of things. Ooh. 6831. Would Incomparable's 28,000-mile range have been a benefit, a curse, or both? It would have been a benefit for World War II. Curse for World War One, but a benefit for World War II. Sean Richards, if the British start using 18-inch guns, would the G3 be designed of 18s? I know they are very reluctant to lose the 18s in the G's designs, and if they are already using 18-inch guns, then the odds are the G3s have 18-inch guns. Ralph Talon, I personally doubt you could ever get Jellicoe the transfer out of HMS Drake, but it's still amusing to consider him getting a better ride like BT eventually did. Well, the thing is, the reason I say he might do it is because HMS Agincourt is being, and one of the reasons why I brought it up is we know HMS Agincourt, the 6th Queen Elizabeth, is added to the construction on his arguing. It's his ship. He's pushing for her design and construction. We do know that. So this is why we are fairly certain she's going to have small tube boilers. Because it's what he wanted. And he'd finally got his way. And this is also etc. why she might have the guns. So basically, it's the ship he caused to be designed. So in the nicest way, if it's his baby. So this is the only ship I think he could move to other than staying on Iron Duke. Because it's his baby. Mitch Oates, unless I'm figuring out wrong, a 20-inch 45 gun will be about 75 feet long. That is about right in my maths. Dan Prim, there is an 18-inch gun outside Fort Nelson, just outside Portsmouth, but the old proving grounds near Woolwich Arsenal got turned into a prison or two. Yeah, and I don't think that 18-inch gun, I'm not sure if that's a World War I one. I know I have looked at it. But I did forget it when talking about it. It's interesting. Vision, is the 18-inch better than the 16-inch, given the USN stuck with 16-inch in World War II for Montanas? Well, that's, again, infrastructure, and for the Americans to build 18-inch, they would have needed to do jump up infrastructure, everything. It was far easier to just keep churning out 16-inch. You could churn out far more. So the Americans are basically going for mass. But 18-inch, slightly slower firing rate than a 16-inch, but slightly bigger punch. Again, if Britain had had 18-inch in service, you can guarantee the Americans and Japanese would have had 18-inch in service in the interwar period. Graham Hunt, if the Agincourt had been built as you say, would the High Seas Fleet even consider going to sea? They probably would have done, because would they have believed the British actually built it? They'd have probably come to sea, but it wouldn't have been. It would have been a very interesting battle. It could. There are very few ships which could have individually made a battle, but let's be honest. If HMS Agincourt manages to come up against any of the earlier German dreadnoughts, and if she's got 18-inch guns, there isn't going to be much left on them after that she's finished. Geo Guy 001, it's one ship, and would Britain have gotten enough Agincourts in service to impact the war? Probably just been the one, and would she have had an impact on the overall war on a strategic level? I don't know. On an individual level in some battles, she certainly would have had an impact, especially if she's 28 knots. Because the real debate is going to be, the real debate would be whether she stays with the battle fleet or goes to the battle cruiser fleet. And yes, Beatty would probably want her, but that's why Jellicoe would probably take her as his flagship so that he could keep her away from Beatty. Dan Freeman, I know Agincourt and 3R class were in the 1914 program. Do you know what was being planned for the 1915 program act? There are some ideas put out there, but honestly, they're more interesting to skip a few of them. Some of them are repeats of the Queen Elizabeths, improved Queen Elizabeths. Some of them are other designs, and they do seem to be looking at various options for the turret. This is another reason why I think Agincourt is as she is, because I wouldn't be surprised if they were planning on building her and then finalizing the 1915 designs. Someone can also look at the garden benches of former homes of gun manufacturing dudes. People steal the weirdest stuff from work. They do. Really, where are the 18-inch guns? I know. I have found some very interesting people. There is a retired shipwright who lives in it's just South Cheshire, basically, in the UK, and his garden is littered with very interesting things. Let's say from his time at Camel Lairds. Knight 68 Trim. Once more tube boilers have been a good idea for the Royal Navy to add to the fleet. Yes, they would have made ships faster, and that's useful if you can for the ships which needed turbine upgrades. Although most British ships were built with very good quality turbines, they could probably deal with it. Although you'd have to accept a quicker wear on those turbines. Simon Shekar, would the 18-inch G-freeze be the I-freeze, considered before deciding on the 16-inch? Possibly. As Juicy Decisions points out, if Jellicoe got his way before World War I and got small tube boilers on the Queen Elizabeth like he wanted, you get a completely different RN for the 1920s, as everyone else is stuck playing catch up to that speed. Well, yes, because you probably end up with small tube R class, which maybe they can't do 28 knots, but possibly they could do 25 knots. Queen Elizabeth's doing 28 knots, and then you've got Renown or Repulse and all sorts of other interesting things. Frank Spotter, Dr. Rossi, how good would Argent Core's underwater protection may have been? I mounted it with I went for the second level of options on torpedo protection. So I didn't go for number 3. I went for number 2 of the options on torpedo protection on the Ultimate Admirals. And the reason I thought that was she would have the state of the art for the time, which is about what number 2 describes. As Dan Freeman points out, Britain has a habit of building a single ships followed by a similar follow-on designs to make up a squadron, e.g. Dreadnought, then the 3 Bellerophons, and the 3 St. Vincent and Neptune. Yep. Definitely, Frank Swatter, always looking for plumbing pipes. Oh no, Starla. Hello. What was the best battleship? What was the best battleship World War I, like Fuso in the Japanese Navy made ship 6x2 356mm turrets? Well, that's 14-inch. I don't. I think what was the best? What was best battleship World War I, like Fuso in Japanese Navy? There are so many options. But I think the best battleships in World War I probably has to go to the Queen Elizabeth class that actually serve in World War I. The Americans do have some good battleships under construction, and so do the Japanese. But they don't actually get around to serving. They mostly come in after World War I. It's over. Mitch notes on World Warships North American forums, back when they introduced the Georgia, they posted a link to actual design drawings for twin and triple 18-inch turrets the USN was considering for alternate World War II battleship designs. They were looking at it. It would have been. Honestly, people act like sometimes the 18-inch Yamatos come out of nowhere. They don't. They really don't. There are lots of people looking at 18-inch guns. Honestly, 20 inches slightly rarer because it's quite so impractical. Because think about it, because it ends up being quite so massive. 18 inches is quite easy to work out. It's 1.5 feet. So your caliber is that times that. So if you did an 1860, that would be a 90-foot gun. And also, you have to remember with barrel length, it's not an inexhaustible thing to keep expanding. Because at a certain point, you run into problems not just with metallurgy, i.e. barrel warping, but also explosive power. Because do you have enough ability? Can you put in enough explosive that will not damage your barrel, but will still get the shell out at the other end without it stopping halfway up because you haven't got enough explosive power to provide sufficient gas to get it all the way down the length of the barrel? which is a real fear with some of the bigger guns. So this is why I'm sitting there going, honestly, if you're building an 18-inch gun, not 40, probably for the British, it's probably 45. 42, 45 would be the caliber. I'd be leaning towards 45 based on what I expect of the design. And some of the things looking at the Furious guns and those 18 inches, but That's 631. How would incomparable affect the Washington Naval Treaty? Panic attacks all round. You think that Hood gets a pass? Incomparable. We want you to get rid of the most powerful battleship in the world. Nope. But I don't see incomparable coming into existence unless there's already 18-inch gun ships in the service, because otherwise no one's going to jump to 20. Grandma, the Grand Fleet Order of Battle would have been interesting with, or if Jellicoe had his baby. It does make an interesting what if. Yeah, if Jellicoe gets HMS Agincourt, which my other nickname for it actually is Jellicoe's baby, so glad to see I'm not the only person thinking that way, Graham Handler. It would have been a very interesting scenario. It would also possibly have meant that Jellicoe was even more reluctant to leave the Grand Fleet than he was, and it would have been quite scary for people to try and take him on. To take on the Grand Fleet. Also, he'd have had something sufficiently fast enough that if he wanted to, he could have done his own scouting. With 28 knots, he could have moved to position and then sent orders back. LS-72. If the QEs and Rs were completed with small tube boilers, could Japan argue for the completion of Tossas and Amagis in exchange for scrapping Fusas and Isas? Probably not, because everything was based not on speed of the battle fleet, but on the firepower of the battle fleet. That's what the British crucially made the discussions about, because otherwise both Japan and America would have had grounds to argue for an increase in the ability to finish off their newer ships. Could we get a spring sharp of your Agincourt? You're gonna have to explain spring sharp. I'm gonna post it on Discord. I'll post all the slides from the Agincourt onto Discord, and they're also going to be on. They're also going to be on the Patreon for people to download. Sonic Canary, why are you calling it Yamato instead of Yamato? Honestly, old force of habit. It's all about what your metallurgy will let you get away with. And that's an interesting example of the South Dakota class. Using the infrastructure you have, can you actually construct it, or do you need a completely new shipyard? Vision. In Victoria era, there was a drooping problem with the big 16 breech loading rifle guns. Yeah, there was an issue with that one. Simon Shekhar, what decides the term squadron or division a unit is called? Like a full battle squadron of 8 ships, it was divided into 4-ship divisions, while other squadrons were 3 to 4 ships strong. Basically, it's the organizing table of the navies, but also it reflects how many admirals they want to have and the firepower of that. So, Royal Navy destroyer flotilla in World War One would often have, could have as many as 20 destroyers in it, along with 2 or 3 light cruisers. Whereas by World War II, it has 8, and then during World War II, it shrinks down to about 4. It's the realities of the conflict they're fighting. Admiral class. One of the greatest what-ifs of naval history. What happens if the Royal Navy gets the 4 Admiral class. All with 15-inch guns. Let's be conservative. Then they have an entire battle fleet of, well, R class, 5 ships. Queen Elizabeth class, 5 ships. Renown and Repulse, that's taken up to 12. 4 Admirals, that's up to 16. It's all 15-inch guns, homogenized. Fairly capable. It also probably means that, honestly, Japan and America are building their battle cruisers. Although I wouldn't want to be in a Lexington fighting an Admiral class, because compared to the Admiral compared to the Lexington actually has armor. The Frank's wonder, how might the unbuilt South Dakotas have fared at Jutland? They'd have been quite useful. It shows, from what I've read, the USN was of the opinion the 18-inch was the upper limit in size of practical weapon and ship design. I agree. I think it was. Danny Phillips, Americans seem to like stacked casements. Why? We won't go on there. They have certain loves. Jaron, I can't wait for the next book by you. Agincourt, Jellicoe's Baby. I doubt it'd be a book. It probably would be an article at some point. Bran Larson, because unlike Mr. Incompetent, aka Vita, he actually knows how to communicate. Yeah, that's the thing. If Jellicoe has a 28-knot capable ship, think about it at Jutland. If he's not getting the information, he's going, right, my fleet can proceed at 21 knots. That's fine. I'm turning south. Poor Beatty sitting there going, I'm running the battlecruiser force. Suddenly, from nowhere, boom, 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 on the radio, this is Admiral Jellicoe. I'm taking command. Huh? Agincourt comes into view. Hello? Are you the German reconnaissance force? German battlecruiser scouting group going, that's not fair. We would like to lodge a complaint with the referee quite quickly, because, again, Jellicoe is obsessed with gunnery, so he's kind of like Admiral Lee in World War II. The ship he's on is going to be very good at its gunnery, and is going to be doing it very properly. So if he has the biggest punch of any ship, it's going to be causing damage. And during the Jutland, we know Iron Duke scores some very nasty hits and does some. Imagine if that's with he's got an 18-inch ship doing that. Just not nice. Take care, James T. Geo Guy, N3 and G3 are superior designs to incomparable. I would agree. A Knight 681. Well, they've had a 1-inch higher caliber than guns and hood, both renowned Queen Elizabeth Revengers, which wouldn't be up to the UK. So no, they would insist on getting still Nelson and Rodney probably if everyone's still got 16 ships. So it'd be an interesting thing to see what would happen. Danny Phillips, the Victoria's guns are developed further. How does it affect Dreadnought? Well, she's of course armed with 16-inch gun, 16 and quarter inch guns. If they manage to get the 16-inch, this is the thing. The interesting thing about, of course, Dreadnought is she could have ended up with 14-inch guns. Vickers certainly are pushing a very practical design at that time. If you've had a history of building 16-inch guns and you've got a lot of 16-inch guns around, then Dreadnought might well start out with 16-inch guns. But you have to remember, whatever guns have become the standard, probably everyone's standardized on them by that point. So that means everyone will be standardizing on the 16-inch guns. Anna Hastala, battleships. Nelson Rodney was still best 16-inch guns or Nagata? In the 1920s, it's probably Nelson and Rodney. But by World War II, there are other ships coming in with 16-inch guns. Decision. Tomato. Sounds honest. No Western history people correctly pronounce it Yamato. Yamato. The cadence matters as much as the phonics, though Clarke tries. That's the only thing that counts. I do try. Lesson class. As you can see, I'm trying to make orange the color of my channel for some reason. Should the iron have improved the 15-inch to a 45 instead of 42 as part of the part of war upgrades? It would have been interesting if they had. There's a debate on the treaties whether they would have been allowed to, but they probably could have done. Knight 6A31. Is there any truth that the Admiral class was based on Incomparables design? I don't think so. I think they're based, if anything, in the Admiral class are probably an extension of of some of the early designs. Again, potentially Agincourt, potentially some of the 1915 designs, and Incomparable, if anything, is probably based on them. Bad guy situation. If Agincourt gets built, do the Revengers get built the same way as they did, or do they become copies of the Agincourt? Potentially become copies of the Agincourt, in case potentially the RN ends up with 3 ships with 18-inch guns, because they might decide that, frankly, whilst those ships won't have the 32 knot speeds, the 18-inch guns will be kind of useful. Hello, John Shea. Vision. They were the German recon force. I think, again, if Jellicoe and Agincourt are teamed up, it becomes interesting. All right. Let's see. Stanford, 2 of the R-Class were contracted out to commercial yards, so we know what they would be fairly well. They turn into Renown and Pulse, though. But the one from Plymouth? Possibly. The one I remember, Agincourt is built anywhere is built in Portsmouth. Yes, but what if the 18-inch lead-out filled shells, 18-inch lead-out filled shells, big bags and flashes on the outside of the armor? If it's being run by Jellicoe, it ain't going to have some of those problems. Geoguy, would you rather have 4 Admirals or 4 G3s? 4 G3s. The better, more sensible design once they're there. But I don't like the gun arrangement of G3s. We'll be getting that in a second. Brandon Larson. It would be very tempting to do so, but the trouble is there's the politics of removing him. Basically, the agreement between Jellicoe and Beatty has been Beatty do the politics to allow Jellicoe to run the strategy and the operations. And that's a trouble. Beatty has become the showman, the picture of the person in front of every camera. Level 98 bear hunting armor. Iron Duke almost took out Koenig's captain at Bratton Jutland, but the shell bounced off the conning tower. Yeah, Iron Duke's gunnery was good. Imagine if, again, that was Jellicoe. He didn't want his flagship having bad gunnery. Agincourt would have had good gunnery if she'd been built and had been as this with him. Dr. AC, orange because you're secretly Dutch? I do like that colour scheme. Graham Hunter, And what do you think Evan Thomas would have followed the quiz? Lodging complaints all. More likely, we are going to be swimming soon. Where's the white flag? Yeah, who do you think? Basically, Evan Thomas would have gone, I have to pick Beatty or Angelico. Come here, follow! Okay, so we have Agincourt steaming with 4 Queen Elizabeths behind her. At some certain point, there's probably a few German Navy going, Diane, is your sister anywhere around? No? Okay. Besides Sheikh, speaking of accurate gunnery, do you think the claim that the Argo Clarks are better than the contemporary Dryers holds water in Model 1? I think they both depend on the training and experience of their crews. Neither is exactly an easy system to use. I'm a sucker for speed, so I prefer Renown's OQs, but the mental impact of the QUs at Gentland for sheer was unequal to anything else. Alfred. Here's the G3. And as you can see, the most pointless gun in the world of history and in history of ship design. That gun. That gun is pointless. It cannot fire forward well because of its position. It cannot cover your aft properly because of its position. It is pointless. It is the most worthless weapon system you could ever install on any design. It's an engineeringly brilliant idea. It's an operationally, tactically, strategically, any kind of actually fighting a freaking vassal idea terrible. Alfred B228. I like the Lexington battlecruiser design, so I'm happy it made it to the world of warships. But I'm a little salty that they gave them to the Colorado 1645 and not the 1650 she was designed for. I agree. I think that would have given her a very nice range advantage, which could. I had to say though, I did enjoy because I got to test out the Lexingtons a bit, and my Lexington basically I specialised in. For starters, she's not got the armor, so do not muck it up in the center of the map. Do not take your Lexington into the center of the map. You will be wiped out. Okay? She hasn't got the armor to stand up to a heavy cruiser. But whip around the edges of the map and you can take out any carrier that's hiding around. You can blast at other ships while racing past. It's great fun. And she's a freaking nightmare for anyone to deal with. Because in World of Warships, they're used to everyone charging into the center. So you go around the edges with this very fast Lexington, and they're going, what the fuck? Why am I getting shot at? Because they're fighting in the center with the other one, and suddenly they've got your 16-inch shells coming out from an angle which they didn't expect anyone to be at. It's useful. Knight 6831, US Lexington versus Japanese Magis. Who wins? Who gets to decide the pace of battle? If the Lexingtons get to decide the pace of battle, they win. If the Magis get to get closer, they probably win. Seneca, what Dreadnought or planned Dreadnought gets the worst name from mod perspective? None of them get really bad names. There are a few which are names which could be interesting if you translate them between languages. Geo Guy 001. Why did the Royal Navy never build a Dreadnought HMS Queen Victoria? If they built some more of them, they probably would have built a Queen Victoria. But guys, how well do you think the Lexington battlecruisers would have fared in World War II? Battlecruisers didn't seem to be fared too well in both World Wars. Battlecruisers would have actually done pretty well in World War II. Lexingtons would have been, well, think about it. You need a fast carrier escort? That's your Lexington class. They would be escorting the carriers as happily as anything. And suddenly that means they'd have probably been upgraded as similar lines as the Congos during the interwar period. So they probably got some more armor. Probably would have ended up moving to the fast battleship spectrum, but on the lightly armored end of it. But they would have been probably quite capable. So much. Do you agree? After Hood launched, can't understand why countries kept building slow ones. Didn't make sense, especially after the first purpose-built carriers came along. Mainly because of cost. It's incredibly expensive. Hello, Richard Auto. Good morning. Life Vest Orange is the new channel colour. Iron Brew Orange, of course. Like I say, the trees seem to have robbed us of a lot of neat ships. They did. Cosmodromist. Hello, Cosmodromist. I had trouble getting on this stream for some reason. I don't know why. It's going so okay. Some points. Dan Freeman, do you think the G3 Q turret would be moved to a C turret, or B with current B moved back to super firing? C before completion of building? It's very difficult to change it round once you started construction. They might have changed it to a variation on a Nelson Rodney outline, and I'd like them to move that superstructure back, but that made them incredibly forward heavy. No, I just no. The G3s have a lot of potential, but they have a lot of engineering theory behind them. Then, folks, to be fair, some Japanese cruisers had worse gun positions. I agree, but that's the Japanese cruisers where they're trying. This is the G3s. These are these are designed pre-treaties, so they are only restricted by your imagination and the limitations of the Suez Canal and what dry docks you want to be able to use. Dr. C, I see. How fast comparatively are the Lexingtons in World of Warships? Pretty darn fast. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say how fast mine was, but mine was certainly overhauling many. Salmon Shika 93. Any thoughts from Admiral Fisher about the Admirals? He would have liked them to be bigger. Graham Hanlon, battlecruisers World War II, more useful what they were meant for, sort of. Okay, Hood got unlucky. Yeah, Renown was chairing around and could well have caught the Graf Spee. If you have basically the battle cruisers in World War One are dealt in World War Two, they're hunting down surface raiders. They're doing surface raiding themselves, economic warfare. They're a brilliant thing for covering the whole Atlantic. Put them with a fast aircraft carrier, and suddenly you have a combination. And that's the real thing, because this is often my point. If you build your battle, if the British had gone with the carrier conversions of the admirals rather than courageous, glorious, and furious, then you would have had 3 very fast aircraft carriers along with Hood, Renown, and Repulse, which would have formed a flying wing, which would have probably meant that Renown, Repulse, and Hood would have got upgraded first because they would have been your fast ships that would react with your carriers. And that's 3 task forces, which are scary as anything for anyone to fight. For sure, what if the D-Day amphibious landing tanks have been developed from an armoured boat instead of a Sherman tank? Have a look at the LVTs. Stewish, you're right in that if it's ineffective and useless because it can't catch anything or a private sector carry, it's very much more expensive. But the trouble is, that's a long-term perspective, not a short-term treasury. I actually have to pay for this now. For the right question. Dan, Britain builds the G3s. Britain then builds the largest floating dry docks to spread around Europe. Empire could have done, or could have just lengthened some of the dry docks they had. That would have been expensive in Britain, but probably cheaper to do around the world. Phillips, move the funnels back to where the mast is, and you could probably move the superstructure to get a better turret position, maybe. Potentially. Bud Guy 609, why did the US go with light armor on Lexingtons when they were designed after Jutland and seen the plans for the Admiral class? Because they wanted to go fast. Shemak, is there something that Fisher didn't want to be larger? Not really, no. Geoguy, wasn't there an early G3 design with a conventional layout? There was one. There were a few. The i3s were quite interesting. Anna Hastala, one of the best books of England's Grand Fleet in World War I by Arnold Gustav von Schutz from 1923. That is a good book, although I've only read a couple of chapters of it because I've not found a full thing converted to English, but I have found a couple of chapters which were converted to English for journals. M35 Benmeds. When ships' guns get larger, do they get harder, easier, or remain the same in regards to servicing? About the same level of difficulty, but they tend to require a bit more in the way of servicing. They tend to require a lot more in basically the equipment. If you can imagine it, the machinery to elevate a longer barrel, a larger gun of caliber, let's say an 18-inch gun, is slightly more heavy duty than the machinery you need to elevate a 12-inch gun. Because think about it, a 12-inch 45 is 45 feet long, and 12 inches in the sort of diameter, so it's in terms of the hole in its barrel. So that's quite, that's manageable, but it's heavy, but it's still manageable. 18-inch 45, well, that's 67.5 feet long. And that's 1.5 foot in diameter at the back. No. It's a lot heavier. A lot more difficult to move. Jack, Force H1, H2, and H3, basically. Pretty much. Knight 683. What was the Republic of China's Navy rebuilding plan in the 1930s? Zilch. The Republic of China doesn't really have much of a naval plan, and that's part of the problems which lead to World War II, lead to their issues with Japan. If anything, they should have been buying submarines. Shikaya 93. What were the dimensional limitations that were there for British design of World War II, like World War I, like drafts, beam length? The widest warships then was 104 feet, while the deepest reach 33. So feet excluding liners. You're probably talking Hood is about the maximum they can build. So if you consider that HMS Hood on their existing infrastructure without doing any changes is 260 meters, well, 860 feet 7 inches, or 262.3 meters long, 104 feet and 2 inches in beam, that's 31.8 meters, and draft is 32 foot, which is 9.8 meters, but some ships have draft which goes down as low as 11 meters, so that's probably what you're looking at as the biggest. Right, coming up to the end for this one, and then I will take I was planning on walking the dogs before tonight's live, which is why it's scheduled at 7 o'clock. But I might end up starting it early if I don't get to take dogs for a walk, because it's absolutely chucking it down with rain. And you won't realise this, but the fluffy research assistant has basically curled up in front of the electric radiator and is going, "You move me, I kill you." Decision. The Iron Design Star from 1915 to 1925. I feel the need for speed. Potentially. Frank Simon, what were the specs for the Agincourt secondaries? If we go back to that one, I can show you. So, my Agincourt has 5 triple 4-inch guns as secondaries. So it has 2, and 1 centerline aft above, in a sort of position above the rear 80, on the sort of the section above the 18-inch turret. So it has a 9 4-inch guns, broadside. I went with the 4 inches because that's what I fitted to Renown and Repulse. And I did 4 single 2-inch, but you could do 4 single 3-inch AA guns if you wanted. Mm. Anna Hastana, I had the book in the finish. You're very lucky. Bad Guy 829. Does World War II still happen if there are no treaties, since the Allies would be a lot stronger and possibly delay on development of an aircraft carrier that came to see in World War II? I would think, actually, if there's no treaties, I think the aircraft carrier develops earlier. Because if you're able to build carriers unrestricted, then probably someone builds a big carrier and someone else will build a big carrier, and everyone ends up building a big carrier. 9683. Whose submarines might have been chosen? Probably Britain's. Maybe America's, but probably Britain's. You never know, the French might have sold them something, but probably Britain's. Okay. The Germans, remember, couldn't build anything, so then it would be Dutch submarines if they're going for a German one from Chiang Kai. Chiang Kai-shek wants Dutch. It wants German. I don't know. Oh, Sam Chicago, weren't the triple 4-inch mounts awkward to operate, requiring photos? Yes, they were, but they are of the time. Remember what I said earlier. What I found interesting was in my World War II upgraded version, I changed them for double 5-inch guns, and actually that reduced the crew and kept the weight, broadly speaking, the same. And I just actually changed them one for one, so that she ended up with 10 5-inch guns. So basically, my idea will use 5.25s. Because I think she'd be that sort of weapon. Okay. Alright. Hello, everyone. You've decided to come up. Okay. So, what have we got coming up? We have the Erebus class coming out on Tuesday as a long patrol. And then we have the Battle of Havana and Trafalgar campaign on the 19th of October. And we have the vote about to go up now. The vote will go up tomorrow for the lives for Patreon 34. The 8th of October, that's next week's live, next Friday's live, is on the Battle of Kentish Knock, which took place in 1652. And I just love it because it's a Battle of Kentish Knock. So that's what we've got coming up this week. We've got the Royal Navy Monitors, and we've got the Battle of Kentish Knock. And there's also going to be the patron vote for what's also going to be the patron lives of number 34 and number 35. And 21st of October, we, of course, have the Battle of Trafalgar. Nighttime Productions. Always been curious. Was Repulse 1936 a refit a compromise of sorts? It was. It's basically a quick refit, so she could cover our Renowns in for a long refit before Hood has her refit, and then Repulse would have had her refit. If she was going to have it. She might have been replaced by a fast battleship by that point. Nighttime Productions. Have we covered the Vanguard? Sorry to ask, but I have to pop off at points. Vanguard was covered in the first episode, and it might also be going to feature in this evening's episode, starting at 7. Thank you, Martina. Cute dog. Thank you, Night Secretary, everyone. Yes, this is my fluffy research assistant. One of them. There is the Tafra, who's currently with my mom and sister, wandering around. Graham Hamler, I'm still thinking of Commodore Clapp having Vanguard. Yes, if Michael Clapp had HMS Vanguard as his flagship, there would have been a much shorter land war. Because I can only imagine what he'd have done with her. John say some weapon mounts in the Ultimate Armored Dreadnoughts can be weird at times. They can, but they are. Let's put it this way: considering the limitations of what you're trying to achieve, they've got a freaking good system set up. I can't wait. They're still developing. It's still in beta, and I cannot wait till they get to the final full version. It's going to be wonderful. Frank Spanner, Dr. OC, was Vanguard built the way the RM wanted, or was it a compromise? It was a compromise. What they could achieve in the time available. Like most ships, it's a war build. No ship built during wartime is ever everything you want it to. You would like it to be, but it's built, and that's the important thing. And on the 4th of November, as alive, we have Trafalgar to Dreadnought, a century and 15 ships and battles. So basically going from 1805 to 1905. I just thought it'd be quite a cool thing to do. Level 98 Bear Hunting Armor. Do you think that if Agincourt had a sister, she would be named Crazy? Potentially. Potentially. Potentially, let's put it this way, if they order more of them, they call them the battle class. And then you get Cressy and possibly Trafalgar. That's the other option. She becomes Agincourt and the sister becomes HMS Trafalgar. There are lots of options which make the Falklands War very different. Anyway, I'm going to say thank you everyone for being here, and I will see you in about an hour and 40 minutes, because I have to go and see what I can do weather-wise for Fluffs, and make sure I have all my presentation ready for this evening, which will be, as I said, about 3 to 4 hours long, so that should be fun from about 7 o'clock. Seth Thompson, was the Tiger's flight deck and hangar large enough for a Harrier? I think so. Although they probably would have been used as a forward operating base for the Harriers, rather than as an actual hangar for the Harriers. So probably the Harriers would have landed to refuel before conducting a flying around doing the cap over the islands. So they would have acted as basically a refueling station, right? Like the forward operating base built in San Carlos itself does. Danny Phillips. 14-inch Dreadnought. The scrambling that would cause is hilarious, especially if they make them faster. Yeah. Let's put it this way. If you did the maximum you probably could with the Dreadnought, you could have probably made a 23-knot ship, and you could have made a 14-inch guns. And if you'd done that, then that would have set up a very, very interesting Dreadnought race. Because she would have not only had more main guns and a uniform battery, she would have had more powerful guns than anyone else. So if you think about it, everyone would have had to wait for their own 14-inch gun designs to come in to be able to match it. Otherwise, they build a 12-inch ship and they're already outclassed. Oh, you're able to do. You've got a 21-knot 12-inch gun ship. Oh, the first Dreadnought the British built is already 14 inches and 14-inch gun and 23 knots. Take care, everyone. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, Anook. Thank you, Level 98 Bear Hunting Armor. Thank you, Greg Salsky. Thank you, Frank Spalato. Thank you, Steve Windish. Thank you, Peter Dawson. Thank you, Bijan. Thank you, M35 Bennett. Thank you, Old Richard. Thank you, Summer Shika. And thank you, everyone else who's been watching. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you liked the videos. And I hope you'll stay for round 3. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you, Night Heron Production. Thank you, Zaki Gherkin. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Thank you, Brandon Larson. Thank you, Amno Hastala. And thank you, Calvin Gasberg. Thank you. And Ralph Talon. Thank you. And Graham Hollander. Thank you.